chance to wax this thing with the Meguiar's ceramic wax, and that stuff, man, I mean, it's just like a temporary fix until I actually get it paint corrected and ceramic coated. But dude, it is like a mirror. Super impressive. Did the whole car. Took about an hour. Looks really good. What is happening, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another video. Today, we're gonna be doing a first impressions video on my 2020 Supra. We kind of did a little short ride along when I first revealed the car, but I wanna go for a little drive and just talk a little bit more in depth about how I feel about this car, maybe some things I don't like, and yeah, just a brief overview on my first impressions of the 2020 Supra. I love it. It's a great car. The road presence of this thing is unlike any car I've ever owned. So let's go ahead and hop in the car and go for a little drive. Hopefully this view back here is pretty good. All right, throw her into sport, keep her in auto until we get out of here and then get into this video a little bit. So the first thing that we're gonna point out, which is sort of the obvious that everybody could not stand, was the steering wheel. And I have to 100% agree with you. Absolutely not a fan of the steering wheel at all. But luckily for us, we have a remedy. So AZA, I believe it's AZA or AZA Auto Wheel, they are a company that I have worked with in the past, and they do custom steering wheels. They did one for my E90 M3, which was one of my favorite steering wheels that I've ever had in any car. Now, I've always upgraded steering wheels. It doesn't matter what the car is. The F30, the E90 M3, and the M2 all had different steering wheels that I personally upgraded. AZA Auto Wheel is pretty cool because you can go in and really fine tune, like you can change every little design piece on the steering wheel. I tend to keep it relatively conservative on steering wheels. I think going over the top, all like carbon colors is just too much. Keep it simple. The problem with the Toyota Supra steering wheel is that it's very thin. Like this steering wheel feels, it feels like it's straight out of a Camry, to be honest with you. It's not impressive at all. It's an extremely thin steering wheel, and it just doesn't feel good. It doesn't really look that good. So I agree with all the comments of people like, the car is beautiful, but the steering wheel has got to go. 100% agree with you. That's something that we're trying to get handled as soon as possible. They do have to ship it from overseas, however, so it does take a little bit of time. Could be a month, maybe even longer until I get that in my possession, but that is on the way. Amongst a slew, we have so many things coming for this car, you guys. I don't want to get into talking about what is coming for the car because there are so many parts that I have on order coming for this car, and we're going to see some very wild renditions of the car, versions of the car. I'm telling you, everybody looks at this thing. The first thing that I realized about owning this car, and it really didn't cross my mind, it didn't dawn on me right away when I bought the car, but it attracts so much attention. Like whether that's a good or bad thing, or whether you want that or don't want that, the fact of the matter is this car attracts a ton of attention, and I think it just looks so different and unique that people kind of snap their necks and look at it and are like, what in the world is that thing? Or damn, that thing looks really cool. It sort of has like a supercar presence to it. Obviously it's not a supercar, I'm not saying that, but it just does sort of have this obscure and wild look to it, design that is just out there, and I don't think that a lot of people are used to it yet. So I've had the car for what, 4 or 5 days now? 5 days. I've had the car for 5 days now, and you guys, I love this car, man. Like, I really enjoy it. I was a little bit worried about going from a manual to an automatic because you guys saw in my last videos with the M2, I talk a lot about the manual and how much I love the manual, and that will never change. I will always love driving a manual transmission. But there is something to be said about a really fast automatic. This transmission acts almost as if it were a DCT transmission, and I do agree with a lot of the reviews that are out there. It's like, why didn't they just go ahead and put a DCT transmission in this car? Nonetheless, the ZF transmission in this car it's very quick. And it feels great when you're driving it. This transmission fits this car. I think, in my opinion, it suits this car very nicely. There have been some other reviews on this car where people seem to think that, you know, they really dropped the ball by not offering a manual. And look, if you're like a die-hard manual person, then this car is just not for you. And I can see why that could upset some people. For me personally, it's nice to switch it up every once in a while, try new things, try new platforms, try new transmissions. I really, really do enjoy this transmission in this car. It's comfortable when you want it to be. It's fast when you want it to be. It kind of covers all the bases. As far as the engine, in comparison, you know, the B58 to the N55, there's no question that the B58 makes more power and can handle more power than the N55. I did pretty much everything without going fully into modifying my car. I did all bolt-ons, tune. We got as much as we could without changing out fueling and bigger turbos, and I was right at about 400 wheel. This car, all it really takes to get above 400 wheel is intake, exhaust, and tune. I spent a lot of money getting the M2 just to 400, and from what I understand, a simple intake, exhaust, and tune will get this above around 450 horsepower, which is crazy. So we're obviously going to go full bore with this thing. Really hoping to see, you know, in the 5s at the very least before we end up doing turbo. I would like to do upgraded turbo and fueling, but I won't get into talking about that kind of stuff. Man, the way that this engine pulls and the way that it puts down the power in the Supra is incredibly smooth. And you know, one flaw that the M2 and the N55 had, the torque felt great in that car. First gear and second gear were mental in that car. Once you got to third and fourth gear, the car just kind of like shit the bed a little bit. So the main difference that I've noticed between the B58 and the N55 is that those higher gears, that's where the B58 shines. It does not stop pulling. The power continues, the boost continues. They just did such a good job designing this engine. So from what I understand, the B58 is essentially the next rendition of the N55. So BMW came out with the N55 and then they made the B58. So this is like the better version of the N55. It has some of the characteristics that the N55 has, but it just performs better on all accounts. Also, not to mention that the sound of the B58 is really good. I still think the N55 trumps all BMWs when it comes to sound. The N55 has such an incredible sound to it, besides the S65. The S65 is an incredibly good sounding engine, but the N55 sounds amazing. The B58 sounds really, really good. Stock, this car sounds absolutely incredible. Stock for stock, this is the best sounding car that I personally have ever owned. Right out of the gate, you're getting a really, really good exhaust note, and then you're also getting some slight burbles, but it's not over the top, it's not obnoxious, it sounds really good. It suits this car super well. That is just one of the added benefits to this car. It sounds really good, it pulls super hard, the engine feels great, the way that the power is distributed feels really smooth. I think that the only place that I've kind of noticed this car slacking a little bit is the suspension. Now, this does have the adaptive suspension, but you have to remember I'm coming from an N55 OG M2 that was pretty low to the ground, had the front lower sway bar upgraded. It was extremely stiff. So once you go from a car like that over to a car like this, it's hard to really make anything feel planted without it being upgraded a little bit when it comes to the suspension. So being that this is a stock suspension, it's good for what it is, but we are gonna make it a lot better. I think once I get the suspension dialed in on this car, it's going to be really, really fun to drive. It already feels really good, and I understand why it was designed the way it was, because you want this car to appeal to a vast majority of people. You want a lot of people to be able to enjoy it, and not everyone wants to have a very stiff, slammed car. That's just kind of how I Not that I love my cars to be slammed, but I do like them to be a relatively firm and stiff suspension, where other people don't really like that. They like a little more cushion, and for me personally, I just look for a little more rigidity out of my suspension. So with that being said, we're obviously going to go ahead and upgrade the suspension, and I have a couple of other things relating to the suspension that we'll do that will also help in the overall handling and rigidity of this car. The shifting is so fast. It's so fast. I've gotten my tune. I know what I'm doing for tuning, but I haven't looked inside of the configurations and everything. If I had to guess, there probably is a transmission flash for this car. I can't wait. I cannot wait to put that in this car. I think once I do that, this thing is going to be absolutely crazy when it comes to throwing it through gears. Now, do you lose a little bit of that like experience when you're driving the car because it's not a manual? Absolutely. You are going to forfeit some of that just because it is an automatic, but it's still an entertaining and fun car to drive. It's not like a boring automatic that leaves you feeling like you have no control over the gears or it's very numb. There's still a lot of excitement in this car when you drive it. And that was really like my #1 fear. I was like, man, I really hope that I don't regret buying a car that only is offered in automatic. It turns out that I actually do really enjoy it. Another thing I think worth talking about is the fact that I've done a lot of research over the past couple of weeks looking at parts and figuring out what I want to do. There's a lot of manufacturers making parts for this car out there, similar to any of the F Series, F chassis, BMWs. I have a good idea of who's making what and how many parts are available and what kind of renditions of those parts are available. There's a lot for the Supra, and it seems like there's a lot of excitement when it comes to developing those parts. Like, manufacturers still really want to get ahead of the game when it comes to making parts for the Supra and the B58 in this car. So that's always something really important when you're looking for, the next car to buy. If you're someone like me that loves to build cars or just put parts on cars and just kind of change things up, you kind of always want to be able to see what else is out there. You don't want to be limited, and we are not limited with this car at all. So from a driving perspective, I think this car is great. I think it's perfect for what I need. I'm really excited to put down some good power in a car that I know can handle it, and I'm not going to be limited by my transmission or limited by the actual engine itself. The B58 can make a lot of power, and it can do so on stock fueling and stock turbo. So I'm actually heading to CES Motorsport tomorrow to dyno the car. We're gonna have a good baseline stock number of the car, and I just wanted to do that because I've never done that on my car. I've always just taken like general numbers off of the internet, and then when we added all the parts, we dynoed and we're like, oh, we added like this much horsepower. I want to really know how much horsepower we are adding to this car after the parts that we buy. So I think that will be beneficial for a lot of people, especially Supra owners and B58 owners that want to buy different kind of parts, throw them on their car, and know exactly how much power they're going to gain. So those are kind of like my first impressions on the driving capabilities of this car, what it feels like to drive it. The way that it looks, I just love the styling of the Supra. I think the designers did an incredible job on this car. I always loved the rear end, and I always loved like the rear quarter shots and the side profiles. The part that took a while to grow on me was the nose of the car. I wasn't in love with the front end right off the bat. It took a little bit of time for that to grow on me, which is normal with most new cars that come out. Cue the G80 comments. But after a while, once I started to see them modified a little bit, and I kind of looked at the opportunities that we had for changing up the front end, I realized that this car can look really good. It grew on me once I started looking at them a little bit more. And I've come to love it. I've come to really like the way that this car looks overall, back, front, side, the whole thing. I just think it has such a unique road presence to it. One of the biggest complaints you'll hear about this car is the wind buffeting. When you roll down the windows, there is crazy helicopter going on. The way that this cockpit is designed and the way that this window is designed, it just creates a ton of noise when you roll down the window. Honestly, like one of the biggest complaints in this car, and I noticed it right away when I bought it. Rolled down the window and I was like, oh, that's weird. And I tried to mess with both windows a little bit to try and get that wind noise to go away. It's unavoidable. It's just always there. It's just because of this weird design of the window and then like this super small cockpit, the wind just has nowhere to go. So it just in your face the whole time. But the good thing, you guys, is there is a fix for that. There is an anti-wind buffeting kit that I've purchased. I will be installing that and giving you guys my full review on it. Apparently, it takes care of the issue and you don't have to deal with it anymore. Other things about the interior, we went over the steering wheel. Probably my least favorite thing about the car. The steering wheel is just, like it's just not that interesting. I personally don't love the red on the steering wheel. I love the red in the interior, but I think the red on the steering wheel is kind of tacky. I also don't like how thin it is. I don't really like the design of it. Yeah, we definitely have to do a custom wheel, and that should be here hopefully sooner than later. So also with the interior, if you are a tall gentleman or woman, this car is it's snug. It's a snug fit. As you can see, I've got about 4 inches from the headliner in this car. You fit just fine, but you just feel a little bit claustrophobic because it is a very small cockpit. So that could be a good and a bad thing. I kind of like it because it makes it feel more like a sports car. Like you just feel really, really engaged in what's going on in here, being that it's so small. When you have a bigger interior, it just feels like you're driving a boat a little bit. I could see how for like really big people, this is not the car for you. Not to mention getting in and out of this car. I mean, your door sill is right here. Like, you're going to hit that if you just try and get out. So you do a lot of ducking, getting in and out. You know, if this is your daily driver and you're constantly in and out of the car, this isn't the car for you. This is more of like a weekend car. Like, this isn't a deal breaker for me, but it is something to be noted. If you are a really big person, this is gonna annoy the shit out of you because you're constantly going like this to get in and out. I'm a relatively flexible dude, and it doesn't seem to be that big of an issue for me personally, but I could see how for, you know, bigger people who don't want to be doing that all the time, that could be super annoying. It feels so good. It's crazy that it pops that hard with a stock. It just blows my mind. It sounds so good. Third and fourth gear in this car is crazy, man. Like, that's where this car just shines. It performs so well and it pulls so hard. I can't wait to just do a couple of simple modifications like tune, exhaust, downpipe, and intake, and kind of see where this car is at, because those are like the basic bolt-ons that most people do. I'm really curious to see where that puts this car, just with basic bolt-ons. So we will definitely get a dyno session in after I do those first simple bolt-ons. The other thing about the interior that I personally really like is the way that this center console is set up. You sit really low in this car, which for me is a preference. I love that. I love sitting lower in cars. I don't like being super high up. And this center console, like the way that this feels, everything is right here. It's so accessible and easy to grab anything in this area. I love that. I hated the way that the interior was set up on the F-Series. It always just felt so outdated and strange to me. Over time, it didn't make a lot of sense. And I loved where like the G-Series went. I thought that made a lot more sense. But this interior, the way that this is set up in here, I love it. It's a night and day difference from the F-Series, and I think it makes so much more sense when you're driving the car. It also just makes you feel like you're in more of a sports car because of the way that this is set up and how low you are. In my M2 and in my E90 M3 and my F30, I was always slamming the seat as far down as I could go to make it feel kind of like this, like as close to this as I possibly could. The infotainment and everything, I'm honestly not a big tech guy, you guys. I don't go crazy on the technology in cars, but this one is much nicer than my M2. The way it's set up makes so much more sense. I really, really like it. So they did a fantastic job on this interior, in my opinion. A big complaint that you also hear online is, you know, these complaints, they usually come from the Toyota people, the people who are die-hard, you know, JDM Supra fans. they hate the fact that this was even remotely partly designed by BMW. I kind of like it because I'm a BMW guy, so like, I also have a big JDM background, you guys. I grew up building JDM cars. That's what I worked on. That's what I was comfortable with. And then I went to BMW. So this car is kind of like the perfect mixture, JDM and BMW. But I could see, you know, if you weren't a BMW person and you had Toyotas and Hondas and Nissans your whole life, getting into this, you'd be like, what in the world? Like, everything is very different because it's a BMW. Everything in here it just screams BMW. So these cars are in the $50,000 range. That's about what you're going to spend for a used one. That or like high 40s is about what you'll spend on the 6-cylinder Supra from 2020. Now they also have the brand new 2021 that just came out that has a better engine, makes even more power, which is also cool. I think a lot of people are gravitating towards that and hoping that Toyota and BMW fixed a lot of the issues that this one had. But the things that people are talking about that were changed in the 2021, they don't really bother me that much. You know, high horsepower right out of the gate doesn't really bother me. I think that a lot of those things really depend on what you want to do with the car. Like, you know me, we change things, we modify these cars so extensively that like the stock form doesn't really matter too much for me. It's good to have like a base, but it's nice to have a strong skeleton, right? Like a good base to start out with. But I feel like this is solid, man. I feel like this car does a great job. But I mean, you really can't help but smile when you're driving this car. It's a blast to drive. And the amount of conversations that you get into when you go places, it's crazy because it's just such a unique looking car. It's just so different. I personally think that the top wide body kits for this car that are out, well, Prior Designs isn't out, but that is my favorite one offered. Prior Design, I mean, that thing is beautiful. And then the Street Hunter kit and the Liberty Walk kit. Those three are the best looking options for this car, in my opinion. If I were to wide body it, that is the direction I would go. But like I said, we're gonna have many versions of this car, and wide bodying, I mean, that is an extensive process. There would be a lot of work that went into that, and it would be a giant decision for me to make. But I'm certainly not opposed to it. So I think that that covers the majority of the stuff that I wanted to talk about in this first video, you guys, kind of just talking about the car and, you know, my first impressions of it. I really, really like it. I really like the fact that we're changing things up. We're doing something a little bit different. I was a bit uninspired to work on another BMW, like a BMW. I had just kind of gotten to the point where I wanted to do something new, something different, to feel a little more inspired and fresh. And I think that we made the right call with this one. It mixes some things up. We might bring some new people in here. And it challenges me to do some different things, some different styles of modification. So I am really looking forward to this build series, you guys. There's always gonna be people who don't agree with that, which is totally fine. You guys have every right to not follow the build. But if you do decide to stick around, I appreciate you. Anyways, guys, tell me your thoughts down below. Are you stoked? Do you have anything that you'd like to add? But we're gonna go ahead and wrap this video up, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please do subscribe, comment down below, like this video, hit that bell notification, and just like that, this video is over, and we're out. Peace.